this will be the prettiest box in all of the land. Make sure they know it's dangerous. Definitely let them know there may be some explosives in here. What else? Flammable liquid. Make sure that gets on there. I like the way that red goes with blue. Gotta match the colors well. One more on this side. And the last and most important little personal touch from shipper to consignee. He's gonna love this. Hey Mike, check this out.
Let's see what you have going on here, Andy.
Well, I used everything that I learned in training so far. I've got the UN number and proper shipping name. I've got the proper packaging. And look at all these neat labels I got on there. I even added my own little personal touch.
Well, I have to say that is interesting, Andy. But just as we learned about the rules and regulations that apply to classifying and packaging of hazardous materials, there are rules and regulations that apply to properly marking and labeling the package as well. You just can't pick your favorite labels and put them all over the package like you've done here and expect this package to move safely through the transportation chain. Now let's go to the classroom and discuss how to properly mark and label a package. How are packages of hazardous materials communicated in the transport chain? They're communicated through the use of markings and labeling. The regulations outline the marking and labeling requirements in subpart D and E of the Hazardous Materials Regulations. Now, marking and labeling is probably going to be the first indicator that a package actually contains a shipment of hazardous materials. There are two types of markings that we are interested in when we are training. There are package use markings and package specification markings. In the last video segment, we covered package specification markings, so we won't be covering them here. But we will be covering package use markings. Package use markings will indicate what is inside of the package by the use of a proper shipping name and a UN number that's been assigned to the material. Package use markings for shipments of hazardous material are found in 172.301 of the Hazardous Materials Regulations. Now, in most cases, each non-bulk package of hazardous materials must include a UN number that's been assigned by the United Nations that are found in 172.101 in the Hazardous Materials Table, and the assigned UN, NA, or ID number as applicable for the material. Now, there are size requirements when they are applied to a package. Typically, they're 12 millimeters high. There are some exceptions for smaller packages that will be found in that same section, the 172.301. There are also additional requirements for technical names, special permits, consignee and consignor name and address, previously used packages, and non-odorized markings on cylinders. 172.300 of the Hazardous Materials Regulations outline the applicability of marking requirements in the Hazardous Materials Regulations. And let's take a look and see what it says here. Regulations state that each person who offers a hazardous material for transportation shall mark each package, freight container, and transport vehicle containing the hazardous material in the manner required by this subpart, meaning subpart D. In addition, there are also requirements for carriers and for the use of pre-printed packages that may be in stock. Now, as an instructor, it'll be extremely important for you to outline the defining criteria for an offerer found in 171.8 of the Hazardous Materials Regulations. 172.304 of the Hazardous Materials Regulations outline the marking requirements, and here we'll be talking about the quality standards for the markings that will be applied to the outside of non-bulk packages. English will be the required language for markings applied to the outside of non-bulk packages. Now, these markings can be applied to, according to the regulations here, on a label, a sign, or a tag that can be attached to the package as well. Markings must be unobscured by any other markings or labels attached to the package. Now, this is extremely important because sometimes shippers will be applying packing lists, invoices, safety data sheets, and other types of documents to the outside of the package. But these items should never take away from the marking doing its job and that is communicating the hazard in the transport chain. This next requirement states that markings must be applied away from any other marking that could substantially reduce the effectiveness of the marking applied. Meaning that if there is a logo applied to the outside of a package, or there's extra printing that just is there for design, that shouldn't be located near a marking required for a hazardous material shipment. Something as simple as a part number applied to the outside of a package could be easily confused for, say, a UN number or even a proper shipping name that's been applied. Outside of the general marking requirements, there also may be additional requirements for marking found in the regulations. And as a trainer, it's important to cover these marking requirements, especially if they apply to the audience that you're training. So let's discuss a few of these requirements. In 172.312 of the Hazardous Materials Regulations, there are requirements to apply orientation marks to the outside of a package if they contain liquids. Now, there are certain exceptions to the rule, so be sure to cover those in the classroom. In 172.313 of the Hazardous Materials Regulations, there are also additional requirements for marking poisonous packages. In 172.315 of the Hazardous Materials Regulations, there are also requirements for limited quantity marks. If a package meets the definition of a limited quantity, these marks will need to be applied. In 172.316 of the Hazardous Materials Regulations, the regulations outline the requirements for markings for other regulated materials. In 172.317 of the Hazardous Materials Regulations, there are requirements for keep away from heat marks to be applied to packages that will be transported by aircraft. In 172.320 of the Hazardous Materials Regulations, there's a requirement to apply an EX number to the outside of certain explosive packages. In 172.322 of the regulations, the requirements for applying marine pollutant marks are found there. The regulations outline the requirements for applying a biohazard mark in 172.323 of the Hazardous Materials Regulations. These will typically be for packages containing infectious substances. In 172.324 of the regulations outline the requirements for applying an RQ mark to the outside of packages containing hazardous substances. Now, in addition to these marks, another important part of the communication process for packages containing hazardous materials is the application of certain labels to be applied to the outside of the packages. The labeling requirements are found in Subpart E of the Hazardous Materials Regulations in Section 172.400. Because of their unique shape, size, and color, labels are typically the first indicator that a package actually contains a hazardous material. These labels will help emergency responders respond to incidents involving hazardous materials and also help shippers and carriers load trucks or transport vehicles containing hazardous materials from a segregation point of view. The exceptions for labeling are found in 172.400A of the Hazardous Materials Regulations, and again, it's going to be extremely important to cover those in your training class as well. It's impossible to cover all of these requirements in this video segment, so we'll leave it to you to go back and check on those requirements to ensure that you cover them in your training class. The regulations outline the requirements for prohibited labeling in 172.401 of the regulations. Now, the regulations state, unless otherwise provided, no person may offer for transportation and no carrier may transport a package bearing a label specified in this subpart unless the package contains a material that is a hazardous material and the label represents a hazard of the hazardous materials in the package. No person may offer for transportation and no carrier may transport a package bearing any marking or label which by its color, design, or shape could be confused with or conflict with the labels prescribed in the regulations. Now, there are also additional requirements there for prohibited labeling, so ensure again as an instructor in the classroom that you go through each of these requirements and cover them as necessary with your class. The additional labeling requirements are found in 172.402 of the Hazardous Materials Regulations. I'm just going to read one to you, but again, important to go through each of these requirements as applicable with your classroom. The regulations state that each package containing a hazardous material shall be labeled with the primary and subsidiary hazard labels as specified in column 6 of the Hazardous Materials table. So basically, in essence, what this is stating is that the shipper or the offerer would go to column 6 of the Hazardous Materials Regulations, note the applicable labels in that column, and then apply those labels to the outside of the packaging when preparing their packages for shipment. The placement of labels outlined in 172.406 of the Hazardous Materials Regulations. Let me read to you some of the requirements, and then as an instructor, you'll have to figure out a good way to present this in the classroom. Now again, it's always good to have packaging on hand or labels on hand so you can actually show the class how these labels are to be applied to the packages. And the regulations state, except as provided in paragraphs B and E of this section, each label required by this subpart must be printed on or affixed to the surface other than the bottom of the package or containment device containing the hazardous material. In addition, these labels must be located on the same surface of the package near the proper shipping name marking if package dimensions are adequate. Placement of labels exceptions are found in 172.406b of the Hazardous Materials Regulations, and let's look at some of these as well. A label may be printed on or placed on a securely affixed tag or may be affixed to other suitable means to a package that contains no radioactive material and which has a dimension less than those required by the label, a cylinder, and a package which has an irregular surface that a label cannot be satisfactorily affixed. For the placement of multiple labels, let's take a look at the requirements there. When primary and subsidiary hazard labels are required, they must be displayed next to each other. Placement conforms to this requirement if the labels are within 150 millimeters or 6 inches from one another. Labels must be displayed on a background of contrasting color. Each label must be printed or affixed to a background of contrasting color or must have a dotted line or a solid line outer border. The requirements for duplicate labeling are found in paragraph E of 172.406. Label specification is also extremely important. Now, from an instructor point of view, what we typically teach is that most commercially available labels out in the industry will meet the hazardous materials requirements. But it's the shipper's responsibility or the offerer's responsibility to ensure that these labels meet the requirements, because they are ultimately going to be held responsible for the labels that are applied to the outside of a package. Labeling specification can be found in 172.407 of the Hazardous Materials Regulations. These specifications will outline the requirements for design, size, and color for hazardous materials labels. As I've stated before in the previous video segments, it's impossible to cover all of the requirements of the Hazardous Materials Regulations in these short series. We've only scratched the surface with marking and labeling requirements. With that, let's go and see how Andy's doing. Well, Andy, it looks like you're getting the hang of this. Now, let me ask you something. If I was to ask you if text indicating the hazard was required on these hazard labels, what would your answer be?
Well, sure it is.
Actually, Andy, the text indicating the hazard is only required for certain class hazards.
So what if I had a package that was too small, but I had multiple hazard labels I had to put on there? Would I be able to put them on the top or the bottom?
Now that's a good question, Andy. The regulations state that hazard labels be printed or affixed to any surface of the package other than the bottom.
That's great to know, Mike. Now I understand that I can't just pick the coolest looking labels and put them on the package. I have to select what's appropriate. Now I really understand the importance of training.